Okay, so welcome to Mathilde Do Chi. She is a legal expert in the space of alternative proteins. Welcome, Mathilde.
Thanks for having me, Alex. Pleasure to be here today.
Good. Could you just introduce yourself a little bit uh, and tell us what it is you do?
Okay, sure. I'm a food law consultant, and I'm specialized in alternative protein regulations. So everything that relates to plant-based proteins, fermentation derived, and then cell-based agriculture or cellular agriculture. And I first started looking at European regulations, so EU, Switzerland, and UK. And then I also decided to teach myself how it was working on the other side of the Atlantic, so the US and Canada. And I also know my way around, for instance, with Singaporean food regulations, Australia and New Zealand, because it's the same system. And also at the moment, I'm deep diving into the Gulf region. And I help my clients, so primarily startups, to navigate the regulatory landscape because they may not be aware that when they draft their communication strategy, many terms like organic, gluten-free, vegan, they are actually regulated or sometimes regulated by third parties, so certification bodies. And you shouldn't use the terms if you don't comply with the requirements that are set in this legislation.
Okay, it sounds like a bit of a minefield then. So I suppose because it's such a new industry, it's really important to speak to legal experts, and I suppose you can kind of guarantee that you have everything covered.
Yes, like it's very broad. Like when we mention like food law, like most of the time people will only think about labeling, but it's so much more. It's everything that happens way before. So food safety risk, hazard, how do you do the management of such risk? Also like consumer protections. How can you make sure as a company that your message is like well understood? um, and also when you are sourcing ingredients to suppliers, because many companies they are not able to produce like all the ingredients needed for the final product. They have to be sure that the ingredients that they want to use is authorized in the place where they want to sell their product. You have many things that don't are not necessarily allowed in Europe just because a certain company hasn't asked for approval yet, or just because it has been banned. Like for instance, a certain E number in the EU have been banned, but they are still allowed in the US. And what happened is like if you try to import such a product, then high chances that at the customs, it will just be sent back. And so as a company, you can also face fine because you are not allowed to import products that don't comply with the local legislation.
Okay. So were you working in food law before you got into alternative proteins?
So I started off working for a food supplement consultancy just at the beginning of COVID. I really wanted to move to Asia, to Singapore, but then it never happened because of the pandemics. And I was doing the compliance check for food supplements coming from third countries like the US, Canada, Asian countries, and so on. And then I switched to working for a multinational like ADM, which is a B2B ingredient company. So they supply, for instance, soy protein, emulsifier, like food additives, and so on. And I was working in the plant-based division. So I was helping the plant-based companies like around the world that wanted to use the ingredients and they needed assistance, for instance, for labeling and to make sure that they had like the correct macro biological parameters checked.
Mm.
And so at that time I was doing only plant-based, but it was 2021. And then, alternative proteins was becoming a little bit bigger. And then I learned about fermentation derived and cell ag, and I wanted to do more. So at some point, I decided to quit and have been working for myself for almost a year. And on the side, I'm also like involved in advocacy through several vegan organizations where I worked on drafting standards to have like a definition that is accepted worldwide. And I'm currently based in Brussels, and I also work for a public affairs consultancy because many companies they do have the power to have regulations that benefit them, but they need to talk to public officials, so stakeholders, all the people that at the in the EU institutions that know that we have to change our food system, but don't necessarily understand like the technology behind, and you just need to have people talking in the same room to one another to make sure that we can move forward.
Okay. So are you finding that the public officials are taking it seriously, even though it's not yet acceptable on the whole in Europe?
I would say it depends on the nationality of the public officials. Like, I'm not sure if you have seen, but like recently, like Italy engaged in a war against alternative proteins. They want to ban the sale and the production of cultivated meat.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it's not even allowed in Europe yet, because no companies has filled in a novel food dossier. And you have some countries, like for instance, the Netherlands, that with Austria are the only ones to have a protein strategy in place, that they want to have a solution to move forward the protein diversification, so transition. And I would say that when I talk to public officials, the Dutch are usually the one that are the most eager to help the movement grow. But I'm also not surprised because you have many companies that have pioneered in that field, like for instance Mozambique, that unveiled the very first prototype of cell-based meats, like a burger, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And they also have to work around with a limited space for agriculture, and this is why they would like to have this kind of products on the market in the near future. But the way it works in the EU is that you have to have qualified majority. So it's 65% of yes when you ask the European Commission, and has to represent 55% of the European population. So it's tricky because some countries are like, yeah, let's do it, and others are like, no, we are not willing to embrace the change. And they also like their reasoning is like, we don't want to have this kind of futuristic food because we think it's a threat to our traditional foods. And I think it's very low. Like I think it's not even like a good reason, It's because at the end of the day, um, who he's actually eating quote unquote traditional food because everything is made in a through intensive farming and so on. And but food is also a very sensitive topic where people they associate food as their cultural identity. And if you dare to criticize or say that maybe could be better, then it's basically an insult. So especially in countries like France or Italy.
Yeah, so you've had the same kind of kickback in France, have you, from officials?
Yes, like France actually back in 2021, they enacted a climate law, a climate change law, and cell-based meat is actually banned in the law. But the thing is, like, it's not even authorized yet, and it's actually most likely against the principle of free movement of goods in the EU. And considering that the authorization is given at the European level, then I'm not sure that France will move forward with that type of ban because technically it's against the principles of the EU.
So, and so cell-based meat is banned in French law.
Hmm.
And so which law is that? Obviously, you know which.
Climate change law from 2 years ago.
I mean, and is that specific to France, or is that more of a sort of EU sort of regulation? Or
So no, it's like specific to France, but the thing is like foods, once it's approved in one member state, it's supposed to be able to be circulated around the 26 other member states. And it doesn't really make sense that the country wouldn't embrace this. Um, so let's see. And I mean, France, I know like for instance, like companies like Gourmet have been talking to the French government, to make them understand that it's not the way forward. And in any way, there will be like a lot of dialogues that are going to take place because from the moment a company is going to ask for approval, we have to wait between 3 to 5 years to get a positive answer, hopefully.
right. I mean, the French farmers have a bit of a history of being quite kind of dogmatic in their approach to kind of opening up trade, especially with the UK.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, they have a long history of that. I mean, how have you found the officials in the UK? You've spoken
So
to them.
no, but the fact that they are now for now they are still applying the EU novel food regulations because since Brexit happened with no deal, they just had to implement what was written already. But they want to fast track the approval process and to propel the UK as a food innovation hub. So I think it's most likely that the UK will authorize the first cell-based product faster than the EU.
Okay,
Uh, and that's something we can also think about is like mutual recognition, but that's something that is a little bit controversial for some countries because they do like to make their own assessment. And if a product has been allowed in a country, that is not very transparent in the sense that you don't have a official list of products that have been authorized, or if the approval process is not so detailed, it's very unlikely that another country would just authorize something super fast based on this approval that was granted in a third country.
right. Yes. I mean, yes, England, the UK, they do have some advantages because of Brexit, but they are slow to apply any of those advantages. Speaking from someone in the UK,
Hmm. Yeah, I
we'll
can
have to
relate.
see what happens with that one.
Hmm. And the thing that sadly the UK lost is like access also to 27 other member states. I mean, for the markets, because the way it works in Europe again is like once it's the approval is granted, you can sell it to potentially 500 million consumers.
Hmm. Okay, so with the rest of the world in mind, which countries would you say after Singapore are closest to commercializing lab-grown meat? I mean, kind of,
Uh,
everyone knows that Singapore have already commercialized it, but
mhm,
it's a bit of a race, isn't it, between the USA, Australia, Israel, maybe the UK, maybe
mhm.
China. What do you
So
think?
I would say maybe Australia, since Wu like submitted an application like 2 months ago, and I think the Australian authorities they said that they would need 15 months to give an answer. So hopefully it's going to be positive. But seeing the pace at which the Israel is going, I wouldn't be surprised if they manage to, authorize cell-based meat like faster than Australia. But they're like the one of the biggest question mark is like, would it be kosher? Uh, because there is it's a must. It's not something that it's nice to have. And you have also countries that have invested in cell-based meat company, for instance, like Qatar with good meats. They are building a factory there, but it's also that every food that is sold in Qatar has to be halal. So then it depends if a halal certification body would be keen on authorizing cell-based meat for Muslims. because then not all alternative proteins are treated equally, such as insects. Like there is a debate like in the industry whether or not it should be included in this category, but insects are actually not halal, and they are banned in
Right.
the majority of the Gulf countries.
I've always got the impression when companies or newspapers they talk about alternative proteins and they put insects next to some cultured meat in order to frighten people.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's more of a it's kind of politicizing it, to say if you it's to sort of associate alternative proteins with insects. And most people around the world, if they think about eating insects, it
Mm-hmm.
makes them, feel a little bit ill or something. So,
Yeah.
but yes, I mean, I see that as well, and I just kind of ignore it because I just think it's a way of trying to put people off.
Mm-hmm.
And I
But
suppose in Israel, with the idea of kind of making things kosher, you just need to find a religious person who can agree that it's kosher.
yeah.
Or if they can't agree that it's kosher, they'll just be selling to external markets.
Mm, for sure. And but in countries that have strong ties with a specific religion, like for instance Israel with Judaism, and the Gulf country with Islam. So you do have like certification bodies like that are independent. So usually they are not like state entities. But then you also have like authorities that is higher, like a chief rabbi or a chief imam,
Right.
and then it will depends which direction this person will go. That will detect like whether or not you have a certification body that are willing to go this way. We have the very same problem in the vegan certification bodies with vegan certification bodies, because technically maybe cell-based meat could be suitable for vegans, but the whole point about veganism is like not to eat or just consume something that has involved like animal suffering or exploitation. And so vegans and vegetarians, they have been doing very well, without meat substitutes and so on. So when they are not the target market anyway.
Yes. And also there's the argument that it is kind of taken from the cell of an animal, isn't it?
Mhm.
Initially. So it's not 100% vegan,
Mm.
perhaps.
It's, I would say, like, just from a personal point of view, maybe it could be certified as vegan, but then you need to look at the whole supply chain, how the cells were taken, if like the animal suffered, if you did also like animal testing further down the line, because you have some regulatory bodies around the world that won't give you a choice when you present like safety data, and they deem that it's not sufficient, then they will force you to go like a tiered up. So, for instance, at first you may have conducted the in silico or in vitro testings, and if the results are not concluent, are not satisfactory, then they will force you to do in vivo testing, and you have to use animals for that.
Okay. Okay. All right. So which of the laws I mean, are the laws uh, around cultured meat, are they very complicated? What are the sort of laws that you are looking at?
So we are looking at novel food regulations. So it's basically a food that has never been eaten before, and in order to be authorized, you need to have regulatory authorities to have a look at the production processes, and to make sure that the food is safe. And the amount of data that you have to submit depends on the jurisdiction. Some of them, they don't require so much. Some of them is like way more extensive. And then we also are looking to like general food law. So in the sense that you have requirements that apply to any type of food, like for instance, like labeling, nutritionals, good manufacturing practices to make sure that the food was produced in an environment that is has the highest standard for hygiene.
Mhm.
And one thing I've been discussing with some clients recently is everything related to customs and import exports, because once these products are going to be authorized and they are manufactured in a certain country, how does it work if you want to sell it abroad? Like it's a huge there are a lot of like question marks, but like generally speaking is so any type of laws that apply to all type of foods, novel food regulations. You can also have like organic regulations that come into play, mostly for plant-based products, because for cell-based, then it's going to be difficult to argue that might be organic because the regulations are not so flexible. And you have also everything related to allergenicity. Like the big question mark, it's whether or not a person that is allergic to meat, like meat is not classified as the mandatory allergen that you have to label in the Western world. But in Asia, you have a couple of countries like Japan, South Korea, that classify, for instance, beef or pork as an allergen.
As an allergen.
Hmm.
Okay. Um, so do you think that will slow down the process in those countries? So,
Not specifically, but that's something to take into account. Can cell-based meats, like for instance, cell-based pork, uh, be harmful to someone that is actually allergic to traditional pork or beef?
hmm,
Um, and that's it's also like a matter of consumer protection, in the sense that it's amazing to be able to create such products, but you have to make sure that people that are at risk of suffering of specific harmful like bodily reactions, they are considered
right.
in this process.
It's about the labeling. Yeah.
Exactly.
So why do you think Singapore was able to get there before other countries? Sort of what's different about them legally?
So legally and also legally speaking is because the system is like so on point. It's like one country that is taking the decision instead of having to compromise with 27 countries like in Europe. And they have also people that they have enough like civil servants. Like basically when you apply, you have one person dedicated to your dossier. That's not something that is happening in Europe. And it's also relates to the policy aspect in the sense that Singapore is classified as a food insecure country. When COVID hit, they didn't have enough food. So this is what like accelerated the novel food growth there, because they are very eager to welcome such sources of food. Um, and yeah, but Singapore at the same time is like it's a small market. It's only 6 million inhabitants, and it's not guaranteed that countries that are part of the ASEAN um, groupment, like it's like basically a sort of like EU, but like in Asia, you don't have mutual recognition. Like it's not automatic. So you have countries like Singapore that's very well advanced, and now like some other countries like Malaysia or Vietnam, they will also be interested, but they don't specifically have the right people in the regulatory bodies. But they are looking at ways to also create such a system.
Okay, I imagine that Singapore have a very pragmatic approach to these kinds of problems,
Hmm.
um, which perhaps other countries don't have.
Yeah.
Perhaps there are other countries who are still kind of dragging their feet, sort of thinking it's a bit of a sort of sci-fi idea.
Hmm. And
Um,
yeah,
yeah.
I think it's like you also have less like lobbies like big meat or big dairy in Singapore as well, because you don't have so much space. I'm assuming that a lot of dairy and meat products are actually imported. So then it's like less pressure from external group to possibly fight such a movement. So, but they are definitely on point, and um, I think, their expertise will benefit also like other countries.
Mm.
And let's see how far they will manage to drive this.
Yeah. Have you had much experience of the lobby groups who are fighting against cultured meat? You know, the meat groups, the
Uh,
the intensive farmers and that sort of thing.
like in Europe, it's like so farmer organizations, they make a point that this type of food would be classified as unnatural, but like legally speaking, you don't have, at least in Europe, a definition of what the natural food is. And they use the cultural arguments that, if it hasn't been created up until now, it's because it shouldn't be eaten. So I think the argument is like not very compelling. Um, and they're also like fighting very hard for this because they don't want to lose their subsidies. The subsidies from the EU, most of them they go to meat and dairy producers, and they feel threatened to have new players coming into play. But in reality, like startups, like especially now, it's very difficult for them to scale up. And it's very unlikely that you're going to have like 50-50 in the, I don't know, 5 upcoming years, like 50% cultivated meat and then 50% traditional meat or meat from intensive farming.
Mm.
And but like I don't really engage so much with them because sometimes their positions are so strong. And what I don't really like is like I like to have like a real debate, and I'm not interested in having a one-sided conversation. If you want to move forward and to learn from one another, you have to be willing to listen to your opponent and not screaming and say this is not even a debate that we should have. It's like that's as a society, we need to rethink the way we are producing our food system, and it's in the benefit of everybody to have a conversation to discuss about this.
Mm. When I've spoken to representatives from the Good Food Institute, they always tell me that they're working alongside farmers um, in regard to education and that sort of thing, which kind of surprises me because I can't imagine farmers wanting to work alongside a body for the future of cultured meat.
Yeah, it's I think might sound surprising at first, but then it's also something that is necessary because food tech can be frightening to people that have no idea about the whole concept and what values the industry is fighting for. And at the end of the day, it's like you need to include them because they are crucial actors in our food system.
Mm.
uh, but is to do that step by step. Like at first, is talk to dairy farmers and have a discussion with them that have you thought about maybe transitioning to plant-based dairy alternatives. So instead of milking cows, you can just like grow oats, and you would be able to produce oat milk.
Right. So, when you discuss with your clients, when you advise them, obviously they want to become commercial as quickly as possible,
Hmm.
because they need to start making money. How do you advise them to sort of, what do you advise them to do to speed up the process? Is there advice that you can give to companies?
So in terms of like novel foods, like not
Yeah.
really. If your products has to go for novel food approval, the best you can do is to have a dossier that is contain all like the best information that you manage to gather. So in the way that it's like well structured, and you have thought about any possible scenarios to answer the authorities' questions. And then in terms of products that are already authorized, for instance, like when you do like fish analogs, to make sure that the ingredients that you are using, are already allowed in Europe, and to make sure that they thought about labeling, consumer education, and so on. What I'm trying to do, like with my clients, is always make sure that they understand how the regulatory framework is working, and if they want to go to the market as fast as possible, For instance, if they are based in Europe, then it might be worth for them considering exploring another market, like Singapore, the Gulf country, or even the US, because they may sell faster. Uh, but yeah, it's I understand that for startups it might be stressful because you are relying on a limited amount of capital each and every time you are raising money. But that's something that you have to consider from the very start. Like the regulatory strategy sometimes is left at the very end, and it's not it's not a smart strategy because it can easily backfire at companies.
Yes, and it's very difficult to raise money right now
Mm.
in this climate.
I have some good contacts with some venture capitalists, and they told me that at the time being, they are just doing a portfolio monitoring. They don't really want to invest in new companies. So let's see what the future holds.
Yeah, which is I'm not sure whether that. I mean, obviously they understand their strategy, but you'd have thought right now you can get companies quite cheap.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah,
but,
true.
um,
It's yeah, like I've studied like investments law, but then like for me, whether or not a company is worth investing in always relate to whether or not the product we have to go through like a long like regulatory approval process.
right.
And if they are intended to enter a market that is not already saturated. This is what happened, for instance, with plant-based food. You see that a lot of companies that are leaving the markets, like Nestle is going to stop the Garden Gourmet line because maybe the products they didn't answer consumer expectations.
Right.
But at the end of the day, you know when the market is too crowded, only the best ones manage to stay.
Yes. And in each country, one company is going to have to spearhead.
Hmm.
It'll need one country who goes and gets approval, and all the other companies can kind of ride on the back of that. But like in America with Upside and Good Food,
Hmm.
I think that was the name of the two. Uh,
Yeah.
no, kind of Upside and Good Food. Is that right? Am I right about that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so,
It's yeah.
just one last question on that one. I know that
Hmm.
they have had the first level of approval in America
Hmm.
from, is it the GSA? The FSA,
It's FDA,
FDA,
and then it's gonna be the USDA.
the
If I'm not
USDA. So
mistaken.
that's what they need to do next, is it?
Hmm.
And so what's their next process? Can you just kind of clarify that?
So it's gonna be like a regulatory like analysis again to make sure you know that everything is on point. And the USDA is the one that is also handling like meat from like a slaughtered animal. So
Mm,
they do have the knowledge for that. And let's see how much time it's gonna take. But something that uh, countries or even the US may do further down the line. I mean, the US is already doing that is to have like in extra of like novel food regulations. Like in the US, it's the GRAS system, so generally recognized as safe. The countries they may decide to implement further down the line like a specific category, like cell-based products.
right. And how long do you think it'll be in America before we get approval from the FSDA?
I think I'm hopeful, like by the end of the year, like
Okay.
could be pretty quick. And you know, like once Good Meat and Upside Food they are authorized in Europe, in the US, they can compete with companies that manage to get approval, for instance, in Singapore, because we are always talking about Upside Food and Good Meat. But the thing is, like in Singapore, you don't have a public list of authorized products. So might be likely, you know, that you have more companies that are just playing it like low key. And all of a sudden we will learn about their amazing products.
Okay. So by the end of the year, and then after that they can commercialize, they can sell it, they can upscale, and that's it. It's off. The whole industry has begun.
And then like once it's authorized in the US, like what happened to imports, and if there would be like a kind of like mutual recognition agreement between the US and Singapore, that's something we can also think about. The nomenclature is also discussed at the FAO level, and also like within trade organizations. And one last thing is like also to have a chat with the International Custom Organization, you know, which taxation would apply to that type of products.
Right. So when it's approved in America, then European companies could sell into America, even if they can't sell into their own countries.
Yeah, if they manage to get like the approval in the US, then they can sell in the US. But
Mm.
then for companies that are not based in the US, it's like how do you import the product that was made in Europe to the US?
Yeah, and there might be some restrictions on producing the food in the first place. If they can't
Hmm.
sell it in France, then perhaps they can't produce it in France.
Like in France, the ban is only on the sale aspect. And in Italy, they want to have the ban on both the production and the sale aspect. But in Italy, you only have like one cell-based meat company, and it says a lot, about the attitude of the country regarding alternative proteins as a whole.
Right. Well, Matilda, I'm going to let you go now. It's been wonderful talking to you. You clearly know your subject very well. It's great to have to speak to someone so knowledgeable.
Thanks
Um,
a lot for having me, and I'm happy to answer any further question from the listeners.
well, yes, let's see if we have any. All right, and thank you very much for talking, and perhaps we can get you back on one day.
Okay, great.
Uh, we stopped the recording.